I suppose this particular area has a whole host of consequences and implications on both sides of the argument. And on the one hand, we need to increase the thresholds because of the implications of the cost of living crisis. But I've given examples on multiple occasions in the House of where I believe the government has contributed to the cost of living increases, and that we have seen which we've seen throughout the course of 2022. But naturally, any increase in the cost of living will have the largest impact on those who are least well off in society. Those on lower incomes spend a higher percentage of their incomes on essential items such as food, transport and heating. When those things rise, it is those on the lowest incomes who have to sacrifice something else to help pay for their essentials. And these essentials are all areas which have seen large increases in recent months, although thankfully we see an ease at the moment in the cost of petrol and diesel, though no one knows how long it's going to last for. But nonetheless, those on lower incomes will still be finding it a struggle to make ends meet. This particular proposal to increase the income thresholds will have the most obvious impact on those who are currently just above the threshold to qualify for social housing. And over the past year or so, this cohort of people will have had their ability to save for their own house severely diminished. Plus, the added costs of house building via materials and labour increases also has an impact on the ability of someone to buy or build their own home. And we need to examine, as a society, and government needs to examine, why this has come to pass. Why are we in a situation where the person in what would have been traditionally described as a good job can no longer afford to buy what would have been traditionally described as an ordinary family home? There are major questions which cannot be addressed by piecemeal legislation or by tinkering around the edges. There are fundamental questions about the state of our country and the social contract which has developed throughout the decades since independence, and that's now broken. People above the income threshold are being squeezed in every direction. They cannot apply for a social house, and rents in many places are hoovering up any potential for discretionary spending or saving that a person might have. People just below the threshold are turning down certain jobs, as we've heard from many colleagues already, for fear that they may no longer be able to qualify for a social house. The Taoiseach previously told my colleague Deputy Naughton in the House that the idea that people not being able to progress in work or get an increase in salary because they would be marginally over the social housing thresholds needed to be relaxed. The income limits for social housing have not increased in line with property prices, which have doubled over the last decade, forcing people to turn down work or face the prospect of homelessness. This has to be turned on its head, and our tax and welfare system must actively support people to return to the workforce in any capacity. Work must always be a better option than welfare in the first place. That's where we should start, and with radical overhaul of the working family payment, both with regard to the exclusions and the rates of support, to always make it financially better for families to access employment regardless of their makeup. On the other side of the coin, will an increase in the income thresholds actually help anyone? It goes back to the analogy I used a few weeks ago about the game of musical chairs. There are only so many chairs, in this case houses, available. But if we keep adding participants to the game, the participants might feel as though they have a chance of success, but the overall picture will simply show that there are still only the same number of participants who end up with a chair, or in this case a house, when the music stops. An increase in the income thresholds will place greater demand on social housing and will ultimately achieve little at the moment other than to increase the length of the waiting lists. Because regardless of what the thresholds are, the fundamental issue is there are not enough houses being built, either by the public or the private sector. Plans to increase the number of available houses are wonderful, but the physical reality is that house building is not progressing quickly enough to satisfy the demand which is built up. Satisfying the demand involves the state building social homes, but also through the government, ensuring that the conditions of the market encourage private builders to survive and operate. This includes large developers, but the small builder is too often forgotten. They are so crucial to our house building over recent decades, but unfortunately many were driven out of business by the financial crash and haven't exactly been incentivised or encouraged to get back into the industry. In fact, many of the government's policies have had the opposite effect and have discouraged the small builder. Overall, Ceann Comhairle, I do agree, in light of the current circumstances, that the income thresholds should be increased, while recognising that the main issue is the lack of supply and the slowness at which that housing supply is being increased. And whilst there are no shortage of schemes, most are only available if there are houses. There are too many current schemes that inadvertently increase the cost of building any housing unit, and the planning policy being dictated by the zealots in the department of the Minister means that the high-density developments are not just not viable and will remain on paper rather than ever being built unless serious changes are undertaken. Thank you.